Okay, this week we're talking about universal design for learning. Now, I'm going to assume you talked about this in your Foundations of Special Education course, but because this is so significantly tied to differentiating instruction, we're going to dig into it this week. So, we actually have 4 learning targets for the week. I can describe the 9 guidelines of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. I can describe the benefits and elements of a strength based approach to planning with UDL. I can create a visual to compare UDL and DI, which is differentiated instruction, and I can analyze a lesson plan for UDL strategies. So let's jump into UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. So UDL is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on what we know about how humans learn. So these 2 quotes are from CAST.org, which is the one-stop shop for anything UDL. The design of products and environments to be used by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. That actually, if you notice, is not specific to instruction. UDL is not specific to education, actually. UDL is things like curb cuts in a sidewalk. So someone crossing a street in a wheelchair can roll down and roll back up. That's an example of UDL, putting something into place proactively so that nothing has to be adapted or specialized after the fact to accommodate someone. And then the second quote, the creation of learning experiences that minimize the need for modifications for particular circumstances or individuals. So that is tailored to education, obviously. So it's creating any kind of learning experience, any kind of task, learning task that really does take into account individual needs. So things don't have to be modified after the fact. So this is a great video that introduces what UDL is. If you can't hear this, it's linked so you can always play it yourself.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal Design for Learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal Design for Learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in the classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have 3 broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all 3. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interest in autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways. Allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
Okay, hopefully that was a pretty good overview for you. So when you think about the things that you heard, how do those ideas, those UDL ideas, differ from or align with what you know about differentiated instruction? Maybe take a minute to pause and think about that, process what you just heard, and then compare it to what you know about differentiating instruction. We heard in the video about the 3 principles or guidelines of UDL, which is multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. So multiple means of representation, that whole idea that this is the what of the learning, we're going to give options for students to make sense of the information in various ways. So that could mean alternatives for accessing information, like a book, a printed book versus an audio book. It could be activating background knowledge for our students in different ways, whereas it could be just asking a question to activate prior knowledge versus filling in gaps for lacking background knowledge. But there are so many different ways, but ultimately this is multiple avenues for the stuff of the learning, the what of the learning. Then there's multiple means of action and expression. This is the how of the learning. So this means options for students to show what they know in different ways. So physical action, expression and communication, executive function. You want to cover the gamut here. So you really want to give students various ways to respond to whatever it is that you're giving them, and include different media to complete tasks. That could be choice of media, or it could be more than one means in a task or in an assignment. And then finally, multiple means of engagement. This is the why. I like how she said it in the video, that what fires up one student isn't going to fire up another. So this really is options for gaining interest in what it is that we are asking students to do. So it really does mean making our learning tasks very relevant and authentic, so students get like why they're doing this. You never love hearing the question, why are we learning this? So you want to make everything applicable to real life, and that way students can kind of grasp, what it is that makes, or what it is that is important to them, because that is different for every student. So I love this visual. It might look a little blurry to you, but you can get it on cast.org. And this just shows those 3 guidelines, the multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. And it gives you ideas of what to do under each of them. So this is a great resource to keep in your back pocket when you're planning, so that way you are meeting students' various needs. So I would save it somewhere or bookmark it. So again, the 4 when we think about the design points for UDL, there are 4 design points: student facts, content materials, products and assessments, and process. So these are 4 things that we have to consider when we're planning instruction. What do we know about our students? What content are we teaching and what materials do we have? What are the products or assessments we're going to use? And then how are we allowing students to process the information? Those are the basics. There are 3 additional considerations, which are content, process, and product. That should sound familiar because those are the 3 things that you differentiate for. You differentiate content, process, and product. So I encourage you to pause and reflect now. We consider the design points. So it's really important when you're planning any kind of lesson. First of all, you have to think about your whole class, right? Like you want to ensure personalization. You're not making a lesson that's for every single student in the class, like a different lesson, but you do want to personalize the learning. So you do have to think about what are your design points and what are the different things that students might need support with, right? Then you'll have to think about additional teaching strategies. Do some students need something different or more of? Do they need directions in a different way, not just orally, but in writing? Do they need different or more frequent checks for understanding? Do you have to use different questioning or cueing even for these students? Do they have certain behaviors that you're going to want to see to make sure that they're learning? Or are there physical elements in your classroom? Those are all things that you have to take into consideration. And then on top of the teaching strategies, thinking about support strategies. Are there students who need a higher level of assistance or intervention or supervision? Like if you have a student with a disability who needs a scribe and you're giving notes or students are taking notes in some way, do you have that level of assistance? Do you have somebody to be a scribe? This is a lot to consider, but when you think about all of these things, this is about being proactive, right? You're thinking about what you want to teach, but then you're thinking about your students and you're saying, okay, what can I put into place so that all students have access to what it is I want them to do, right? It's a very proactive approach to meeting diverse needs. When we think about differentiating instruction, it's actually a teacher's response to learner needs, right? So it's not proactive, it's reactive. So it's guided by principles like respectful tasks and flexible grouping and ongoing assessment and adjustment. And like I said, teachers can differentiate content, process, and product. And we do that according to students' readiness, academic readiness, their interests, and their learning profile, or sometimes it's called learning preferences or learning styles. This, again, is responding to learner needs rather than considering them first, if that makes sense. So when we compare UDL and DI, the similarities are, whereas for differentiating instruction, we differentiate content, that's the same as multiple means of representation, various options for students to engage with the curriculum. When we differentiate process, that's the same as engagement, right? Like different options for students to make sense of or interact with the learning. And then when we differentiate product, it's the same as multiple means of expression or allowing students to show what they know in whatever way that makes sense to them. So at the same time, we're always holding high expectations for all of our learners. We're making sure that we're giving all of our learners access to academic standards, grade level standards, and we're always focusing on increased student achievement. So in that way, DI and UDL are very similar. However, there are some differences too. So again, UDL is a proactive approach that designs flexible goals, methods, materials, and assessments by anticipating what students are going to, or what students might need to access the instructional opportunity. The whole goal is to eliminate barriers, right? So eliminating the barrier before it even happens. Whereas differentiated instruction, the goal is to provide a responsive and optimal learning environment to maximize achievement for all learners. So we're still looking for students to be successful in the classroom, but one, we consider those things before we plan, and the other, we plan first and then make accommodations for it. This right here should not say a proactive approach. It should say a reactive approach. So differentiated instruction is kind of a compilation of educational theories and practices, whereas UDL is inspired by architecture. Like I said, one of the first things I remember when I learned about it, one of the first things I heard of was those curb cuts and how putting those into place eliminates a barrier. So it really did come from architecture and was brought into the educational realm. Again, DI and UDL absolutely can work together and probably do innately work together to meet students' needs. But it's really important to be very aware of how they are different because, like I said, one is very proactive and the other is reactive. So we have to talk about specially designed instruction. So you may or may not have heard that term before, but it's very it's been a buzzword for several years within special education. So it's all about organizing and planning instructional activities for students with disabilities, which is what we do with an IEP, right? So we modify content, we modify the methodology in which we teach, and or the methodology for students to engage in a task, and we modify the delivery of the instruction. So the whole point is to help our students with disabilities succeed in the classroom and meet their IEP goals. It just is one of those fancy buzzwords that they've been using, like I said, over the last few years to really drive home this idea of we are designing instruction based on what students with disabilities truly need to accommodate their needs so that they can learn the general education curriculum. I hope that makes sense. So when we think about specially designed instruction in a general education classroom, because we're not always talking about students in a self-contained classroom, most students with disabilities are in the general education classroom. So you ask, well, what could that possibly look like if they're trying to access the general education curriculum in a grade level classroom, but they have these needs? Well, it can look a lot of different ways. But ultimately, if you look at this pyramid, so the bottom is universal design for learning. That's your foundation. When you're planning, you're taking into account any potential barrier that might come up for any student and you're eliminating it, right? Then the next level up would be differentiated instruction, which is the reactive approach. You've already planned, and now you're thinking about what are student specific needs? How am I going to accommodate that? Then that top level is specially designed instruction. So this is really adapting to the needs of specific individual students, adapting the content, the methodology, the delivery of instruction to meet those specific needs related to the student's disability. And again, the whole purpose is to access the general education curriculum. I hope that makes sense to you, but it is like it's like layers of intervention if you think about it. All right, so let's revisit the learning targets. Hopefully you feel like you can describe the 9 guidelines of universal design for learning. So it's the three multiple means of representation. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Isn't that terrible? I talk about too many things. It's the 3, hold on. When I say 9, people are like, what? It's the multiple means of representation, multiple means of active or action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. But as you can see, they're chunked. Each of these are chunked. So under representation, provide options for perception, provide options for language, mathematical expressions and symbols, provide options for comprehension. It's just chunked. So when I say 9 guidelines, that's why it's 9. But we're thinking about those 3 big buckets of multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. Hope that makes sense. So, like I said, I would definitely bookmark that graphic from CAS.org. The second, I can describe the benefits and elements of a strength-based approach to planning with UDL. The whole idea of being proactive really does lead from it's not really a deficit approach, right? It's a strength-based approach because you're eliminating barriers from the get-go rather than assuming things will be a barrier for students. I can create a visual to compare UDL and DI. You're going to do that in a discussion prompt. And then analyzing a lesson plan for UDL strategies, you'll be doing that down the road a little bit. So, but hopefully right now you feel like you could read through a lesson plan and look for any of those UDL strategies that are in place or opportunities to build some in. Let me know if you have any questions about any of that.